Welcome everyone into today's Fireside Friday chat. If you don't know me, I'm Kevin Mefford, head of the community here at the PreSales Collective. And in that role, I help organize a lot of our events and activities that we're doing within the community. Now, typically our Fireside Fridays are just for our PreSales Leadership Collective members. If you are a people manager and not a member of the PSLC yet, please consider joining. You can go to presalescollective.com/leaders for all the details on that private membership, both the benefits you get, the membership costs and everything there. You can always feel free to reach out to me on Slack or email. Happy to answer questions about that as well. And welcome in Jag as you made it into. So what we've done today is actually open this up to the public. So it is open to everyone. But like I said, this is one of the membership's perks that we offer to our private PSLC members. As far as agenda today, we're going to get past this little welcome and then move into really our conversation with Kevin and Jag about their experiences and the topic of hiring and managing non-traditional talent. So Kevin is going to speak to his experiences as the manager, as the hiring person. And then Jag's going to tell us a little bit about how he got into pre-sales and how he translated non-technical business skills into his role and how he's been succeeding there. So with that, I will stop my share. Last reminder, feel free to drop questions into the chat as we're going along. I'll try to keep an eye on those and watch out for them. We also will have time at the end for audience questions. And in that time, you're welcome to come off mute, ask the question directly. This is a very small group. That's what we're looking for in our Fireside Fridays. So with that, Kevin, Jag, welcome in. Thank you very much. And to start off the conversation, would love to just have each of you introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about your roles, and we'll go from there.
Hey, Kevin, and hey, Kevin. Nice to meet everyone at the pre-sales community here. So my name is Jag. I've been a solution engineer for about 2 years now at Salesforce, and I service the SMB customers in EMEA. Prior to joining Salesforce, I ran a DJ services company for about 13 years. And within those 13 years, it evolved from DJing bar mitzvahs to DJing large-scale events to eventually touring, and then it kind of evolved into a radio show at the tail end of it. So that's a bit about myself. I still kind of dabble into music, more so from like just playing piano or DJing here and there, but certainly not hitting up stages like I used to before.
That's great. So Kevin O'Keefe, I'm Jag's manager. I run a team of SMB solution engineers at Salesforce. So we've got 10 on our team, which is not a small set of solution engineers. So happy to talk a little bit about how all this has played out, and a little bit about me. Previously, I spent 13 years at a small SaaS company, Toronto-based company. And I spent about the first third of my career in professional services. So that's where I honed things. And I became the first SE at that company. And then I eventually grew and led that team before I switched over to Salesforce. So being the first SE was kind of a cool thing. Starting a team was really neat, but really enjoying having run at Salesforce and running SEs here. My team's doubled in size since I started.
That's fantastic, and I love the comparison of both of you, and that's part of why we had you on for this chat. Kevin, you kind of are the very traditional route into pre-sales of, I was in services, and it kind of morphed into pre-sales and then it moved up, and then of course, Jag, you're the very non-traditional candidate, which is part of our conversation today. So fantastic. Thank you both for the introductions. So let's start maybe, Kevin, on your side. Do you remember that first time you had to make the hiring decision? You talked about going from a first SE to now I need to start building a team. What was that experience like? Whether it's sourcing candidates, working with HR, and then advocating for those people you wanted to hire.
It is literally terrifying to make your first hire. I'm sure there's a lot of people on here who've experienced that. It's funny, my first hire, we actually had 2 internal candidates, both people from professional services. we ended up paneling each of them. So we ran a panel exercise. They had to present to the senior leadership team, and they were both extremely nervous. Turns out what I knew, what my manager knew, is that we were going to hire both of them. So we sort of let them move through this, terrifying experience, and we brought on both of them. But that was my first hire. Honestly, not too bad. These are people that were friends, that I had worked with to help move into the SE role. It's the first external hire that I actually had sleepless nights about. When you're bringing on an external hire and you're now looking at the pool of potential candidates out there, I was very worried about this is the only decision that I get to make myself, and what if I get it wrong, right? I think that was the really challenging part. So in order to mitigate it, I really made sure that I looked back at my fundamentals. I did a gut check on what was most important to me, what competencies were there. And that framework helped me, select the right candidate and sleep on it, figure it out. But I did also have a hard time turning people down. I had a lot of work to do to be clear and trying not to justify it. It is my decision. And at the time it was comfortable. Now I'm more comfortable, and I now give people a lot of feedback. If they don't get the job, I'm typically giving them, really clear feedback to work on, and, continuing the relationship, so that it's fruitful for both of us, mutually beneficial down the line.
That's a fantastic point. Yeah. Turning people down is always some of the tougher part, especially when they are a good candidate. They're just not quite right, or, you have a slightly better candidate. So I love your points about always trying to keep giving that feedback to them, always trying to maintain that relationship. Because I've had people like that too, of hey, I have a better candidate for this exact role, but I want to find a place for you. So let's stay in touch. And, I've hired some of those people down the road. And so let's flip it over. Jag, when you decided to make that career change, from DJ to, SE, that's a really big change. How did you look at your applications as, an opportunity to showcase your skills and talents? What do you think it was that made you stand out as a candidate?
I think I would challenge. I think I initially thought that solution engineering would be very, very different from being a DJ, but I think I started finding myself challenging that notion a bit, because I started to notice some commonalities. And then my job was to really communicate that idea to my hiring manager, right? So what I mean by that is, I think some of the things that we see in common between DJing and solution engineering is you're trying to create an API into someone's mind, right? You're trying to really read the audience. And then how do you make those calculated decisions about where you want to take those risks, where you want to place those safe bets? How do you want to sandwich songs together? Some may be, top 40 pop songs, and some may be songs that you just absolutely love that the audience has never heard before. Solution engineering or demoing is much like that. But as long as your discovery, as long as you're reading the room very well, demo just becomes a formality. So my idea was that if I could communicate that to Kevin, it would be great. And I think Kevin and I's first conversation, we barely spoke about solution engineering. We talked about Metallica. So that was our entire 40-minute conversation. And so personally, I think I tried to, the resume was important, absolutely, but I think I was trying to sell myself better on in-person conversations or, calls with a hiring manager such as Kevin. And, it was a virtual call, but I think Kevin and I definitely are way cooler in 3D. So that was a disservice to both of us. But yeah, certainly I would say having one-on-ones with as little of an agenda as possible and just getting to know that person eventually just turns into opportunities for me.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, so the chat's already lighting up of you have the quote of the day already, creating an API into people's minds. I think a lot of people are going to start stealing that analogy. It's a great point. And I love the way that you looked at it of the, solutions engineering really is telling a story. And I do the same thing with music. It's setting a tone, it's setting a pace. It's one of the things we talk to people all the time, that are entering our pre-sales academy of, you came from a teaching background, but here's all the similarities. You came from a performance background. Like all of these things still apply. And I think you outlined it great of we're always trying to, set that tone of a meeting. The demo is just one component of that. So those are great skills. I love the way you talked about bringing those up, and especially for a non-traditional candidate, knowing that it's really, once you have that conversation is where you're really going to drive those points home. So that's great. We talked about some of the good pieces. Let's go back to maybe, where do you think hiring managers go wrong? And actually, Jag, I'm going to throw this at you first, and Kevin, will come back to you. Where are hiring managers missing the boat? What are some things they should be looking out for that maybe they aren't when we're talking non-traditional candidates, especially?
Oh my gosh. I mean, I think it takes the likes of Kevin and like him spreading this love for hiring non-traditional backgrounds to sort of break those barriers. And I think he would argue that it benefited him, right? So I think we need more champions like him. I think hiring managers go wrong when they themselves haven't experienced sort of thinking in the form of analogies and metaphors. I think like the more breadth of experience you have, those are all toolkits to be able to explain concepts in familiar terms to people. So I think if I were to do it again, I think the way an interview would take place, I would place a 7-year-old in front of me as an interview candidate and see if I can explain CRM to a 7-year-old. They don't understand what a CRM is, and they're very, very curious, but they're also very ADD. I'll be curious if comedians would make great SEs. Air traffic controllers, this is crazy. Air traffic controllers, one of the most stressful jobs in the world. Okay. They're looking at gamers right now to be hiring gamers because they have incredible peripheral vision and the ability to multitask more than ever before. And so they're now looking at gamers for the next generation of air traffic control. Insane.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah. It makes total sense when you start to think about it, of how do you overlap skills. So Kevin, the same question to you. Where do you think hiring managers, having been one, what are things you missed or that you think other hiring managers out there are overlooking?
Yeah, definitely. I think one of the tricky parts is a lot of hiring managers underestimate the effort involved to get a solid pipeline. It takes conversations, right? It takes intentional time investment to talk to a wider range of people. And so something, just to go back to the first question to Jag, something that he did really well is he personalized things, right? Like think about a DJ. You might have to DJ a variety of different events, right? You have to be able to appeal to an event or somebody running an event that has a particular taste or has a vision for that event. Then you have to go to the next one and appeal to them. And that's what he did with me. He personalized everything. He understood that maybe there might be connection to music. He appealed to me with certain things. And so, I think, ultimately, going back to the question you directed towards me, you have to have a lot of conversations. They take time and effort. But I feel like I learn a lot from those conversations too. And so if you start to think about the idea that if you can have conversations and pick up stuff, and then obviously get exposed to more candidates, that should benefit you. A lot of people find that they just want to have just enough conversations with the right experienced candidates. I feel like you might be missing things. And while that might appear to be safer, it does take more time that I think a lot of people really understand.
No, it's a great point. And so thinking about it, Kevin, when you knew you wanted to hire Jag, you were ready to bring him on. I'm sure you probably had to manage up to other people that are looking and going, hey, that's not our candidate profile. Why are we trying to hire this guy? So what advice would you give to folks who are having to do the same thing, having to justify why he's the right candidate?
Yeah, I think this is the challenge. If you're earlier in your career as a manager, do you have the confidence or maybe the credibility, right? I myself, I thought, hey, there's a lot of room for us to bring in people that can maybe challenge the norm a little bit. That a lot of that comes from who I am. I'm an external hire, and I thought, hey, is there a way that I could differentiate myself by bringing in, really quality talent that are going to do this a bit differently, and maybe that'll really help our results. As far as managing up, you have to be really crystal clear on what the differentiators and the uniqueness are and how that's going to benefit. And so it takes a lot of communication, right? Obviously, you need to be clear on that. I really felt that his entrepreneurial spirit, combined with his dedication and persistence. By the way, Jag was very persistent. I think if you're a non-traditional candidate, persistence is an absolute key ingredient to success. But that would mitigate any hesitancy or de-risk the fact that he wasn't from the Salesforce ecosystem, wasn't a technical sales background. So I think, my recommendation is obviously communicate well. There might be some objections. How long will they take to ramp? How will they be with feedback? Are they going to struggle with the product, right? Get ahead of those objections, just like you would do in any sales opportunity, right? Get ahead of those objections. And I was able to do that. Much more challenging though for a first-time leader though. These are things that have your story straight, really think through about how this will benefit, and come with a really strong, compelling approach to your leadership. And you could be able to make this happen, but this is something that maybe sometimes might not happen. And you have to find your spot too. Are we looking for somebody to come in, get up and running quickly? Sometimes you have to make that hire as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So I do want to ask a quick follow-up question that Jack posted in the chat. How do you communicate building that pipeline? You talked about, it's going to be longer because you're having more of those conversations. How are you communicating that to, your talent acquisition team? Are you using internal recruiters for these non-traditional, or are those folks that you're pulling out and you're building that pipeline? Because Jack's point, you don't want to get overwhelmed if your recruiters are bringing in, 200 people that, while are non-traditional, you really don't see a fit. So how do you balance a bit of that?
Yeah, I definitely take on quite a bit of it. I don't rely heavily on recruiters. And that's like a mindset thing. That's hey, this is my focus. This is where maybe other things might have to fall lower down on the priority list, because it does take more effort. I feel like the payoff though is there when you get individuals, if they take an extra month, or if it takes extra time for me to broaden the pool, and an extra month for them to ramp up. What about all the wonderful things that we've seen so far from a Jag? Like there's some incredible things that I would argue might not have come from what we call traditional hires. It's not that they wouldn't be fantastic performers, right? It's just different. And, I like to explore that difference, but it does take a legitimate, it can consume you, LinkedIn conversations, keeping track of it all and doing that. I keep a really regular funnel of people and keep up lots of conversations, but other stuff has to go by the wayside.
Yeah. So you made the point a couple of times, and Jeff just threw it in the chat too. I love your focus on, hey, these external hires, these non-traditional background people are bringing in diversity of thought. They're going to bring new perspectives while they're overlaying existing skills, and those different perspectives can improve the performance of our team. So, Jag, would love to hear from you. What are some ways that companies can support that talent, that's coming in from a very diverse work background?
Oh, well, that's a good question. How can companies support the diversity of thought? I think in solution engineering, we have this advantage that we speak to a lot of customers. Even within those customers, there are a lot of personalities that may have their own individual experiences. So with the breadth of experience you bring, you might be able to tap into their mind in some way, because you may overlap. You may have a commonality with them on something, and then technology can be sort of used as an analogy to explain that. I think at Salesforce, it's unique because even Francois, the chief product officer of Tableau, was in a band before, at the Tableau conference, he actually made an analogy between databases and how sound systems are connected together. It's actually insane how similar data architecture is to the way live shows are performed. So it's coming from the top down, and I think it's taking the likes of Kevin to help with that. It does take a village though. So we have a leader along with Kevin. Her name's Carly. My trail guide Humera. Like, it took a village to onboard me. I'll say that. I think to beef up my technical knowledge, to learn the Salesforce language, it definitely took a village. And I think I would say that my first couple of months were rocky, but it definitely took some patience and persistence to get it all tuned right. I think Salesforce, I'm not sure if it's an actual program, and hopefully Kevin will one day formalize this into a program for non-traditional hires at Salesforce. But I think these conversations help, right? We have leaders from, I think, DocuSign and a bunch of places on this very call. And so these conversations need to happen more to amplify the idea that diversity in thought helps, because we're customer facing and we're going to speak to diverse audiences.
Yeah, it's a fantastic point. So, Kevin, from your perspective, how do you mitigate those risks of hiring someone, into this type of pre-sales role who doesn't have the direct experience?
Apologies, on mute there. Classic move these days. Jag mentioned it. You definitely have to be prepared to support the individual. It's something I thought a lot about and set expectations with my team. And we ensured that there would be a specific soft landing for when inevitably somebody who's come into this large organization and who's put through a very difficult and challenging onboarding and ramping, right, to get ready to be customer facing. There's challenges in there, and you need the support. For me, it was about thinking about ahead of time what some of those things could be, right, and starting to plan around that. And so, an individual like Jag who comes in has, fantastic ideas and sees things in a different way that we're not always used to, because we're just sort of ingrained in all this. And so it's a mix of listening and understanding that, right, but also ensuring that you stay focused. Beginner's mindset is a great example. Okay, if you're like Jag is an entrepreneur, like feedback comes at you in a very different way when you're running events, right? Where it's, I've been working at a corporate, in a corporate gig for a long time. We're all used to feedback, and that was a more sort of a challenging thing that we had to work with Jag on. But that's because, in a normal course of his day, he may not be getting direct feedback in the same sort of way, or he ran the show. This was his business. And so we worked with him on that. And that was a more difficult part. How do we mitigate that? We made sure that we had a variety of people that he could work with, operationally, leadership, other mentors. And I think the combination of those works well. Plus, last one, I talked about over communicating with your leadership about hiring non-traditional. You have to over communicate with your leadership in sales. Remember, we are working with sales. We have to make sure that we are setting up Jag for success, because they might ask, does this person know the product, or where's their experience? And so I really think you need a really solid talk track around your people, so that you can make it compelling to when you inevitably have to align them to a team and say, here's what Jag has to offer. And I think we set them up for success through that, and we use the village, to use as an analogy.
Yeah, those are some great points. I love the way you brought out the, hey, this is not your standard onboarding. You can't just put these non-traditional candidates or hires through the regular onboarding for a variety of reasons. And that's great. And especially the justifying and building up their credentials and profile to sales. It's always the hardest part of any new hire, especially a non-traditional hire, of the salespeople going, no, I'm used to the people I already know, and I know exactly how they're going to answer questions and go through things. And now you're trying to change it on me. I'm not comfortable with that. So I love your point about building out that talk track yourself of, here's how it's going to change, and here are all the great reasons you should take a Jag on, your sales calls, and he's going to be fantastic. And I'm sure with any of your non-traditional hires, once they've gone on a couple of those sales meetings and get that reputation from salespeople, I'm sure it's not a factor at that point. Is that fair to say?
Yeah. I mean, that's a great point. The other thing that we worked a lot with Jag on is keep the aspects that you have from your other life, your other career, right? Don't lose those. Don't get beat down at the big company, at the corporate gig. Use those, right? Hone them, because that's what makes you special and unique, right? Like I always joke with Jag, him and I, we're not that different, right? We're around the same age. We actually used to cross paths in the entertainment industry many moons ago. But I always joke with him, like, what do I have? I just have the 15 years or 16 years of my experience, right? But we're at the same level. I just can rely on a bunch of meetings that I was in when I was 24 years old. Like that. There's not much difference. So how do we help somebody like Jag get those experiences? How do we share those stories, right? How do we share customer examples and things like that? We just have to equip him, and then he can put his own, look and feel to it as he gets in front of customers.
Yeah, that's great. So Jag, I'm going to throw this question to you first, and then Kevin, I'll come back to you for it as well. As you think about the larger organization, how do you think senior leadership could be thinking differently, about their hiring practices to attract more diverse talent? Where are some places that they're getting it wrong?
I think while if you take a look at Workday portals, you'll see it's like this much experience or this degree. I think we're starting to see some changes in the way companies are asking for job descriptions or requirements. But I don't think the way we actually process an application has changed that much. So it goes through a talent acquisition partner, then a hiring manager. I think things like PreSales Collective are helpful with that, because I think it creates sort of a side door to hiring managers without the requirement that this conversation is about a job. I think senior leadership needs to take a look at the way we test talent. So if you were to do a blind test, right? Let's take the people in this room, 15 people in this room, take away their qualifications, have them understand a concept in 30 minutes and explain that concept in simple language in 30 minutes. That would be a great way to test how they can communicate a very abstract concept, but make it relatable to someone based on creating an analogy or connection between that and something else. That would be interesting. But how do you do that at scale? I'm not sure. But I think that way of testing is very much possible. And that way, then after that, then taking a look at their qualifications and experiences can be less scrutinized because you've already sort of vetted them through the process. So I think we need to take a look at it a little differently. You see LSATs like as a way of how they, get into law schools. Some of the questions in LSATs have nothing to do with law, but it's a really good way of how to figure out how someone reasons, how someone understands concepts of like conscience, stuff like that. It's strange, but there are some parallels in the way we are able to test better before we go down the interview path because Kevin and I's conversation was in no way an interview. It was literally a conversation with Metallica for 40 minutes.
Yeah, I love that idea of finding ways to test reasoning ability, testing, explaining concepts, all of those pieces, even beyond additional qualifications. Because I think you're right. A lot of times we list in a job interview, I want this experience, I want this degree, because that is then going to substitute of, okay, because you've done those things, I believe you are good at explaining concepts. And that's not always the case. So it's a fantastic point. Yeah, Kevin, back to you, kind of the same question. Where do you think senior leadership is missing the boat on their hiring practices?
Yeah, like this isn't specific to where we work, but like as I mentioned before, there's quite a bit of a time investment. So if somebody's too focused on being in on customer deals, right, and they're almost acting as a player coach, it's it's going to be almost impossible for them to make hires that are more non-traditional or, you know, have different unique backgrounds and perspectives, because, you know, senior leadership needs to allow for them to have the time, right? So if there's an emphasis on you got to be in those customer meetings, then, you know, the sacrifice is that your hires are going to be whatever recruiting comes up with, right? Versus maybe a hiring manager who's able to go and, you know, put themselves out there and have a conversation with a wider group. So I think that's there. And I think a little bit of like, you know, what's the repercussions of making a bad hire or the wrong hire, right? I think, you know, there's probably a lot of emphasis, especially for new leaders, that like, what if I get this wrong? I'm screwed, you know? What if I, you know, make a mistake on this person? I think if they can, you know, let them know that there is a process involved and that like there's many gates and safety nets in order to make the right hire. You know, you don't do this in isolation. So, you know, helping them get a little bit an understanding of, you can have the right amount of time to try and help and do this a little bit differently, you know, help them prioritize, and then also explain to them that, like, you know, that's okay. We will get hires wrong, and give them that support.
That's great. So as we're starting to wrap up the presentation part of this, audience, get your questions ready. You know, Jag, what's one piece of advice that you would give to someone who's trying to make this type of serious career change into a brand new industry, a brand new role?
I would try to book as many one-on-ones as possible with people, regardless of their title, regardless of their role, and really just try to get to know them at that point. I know the pressure is real when it comes to looking for a job, for sure, but try to make it as much about them as possible. And you'll be top of mind for when something opens up, because, you know, technology is technology, but people sell to people, right?
That's great. And you gave us a couple of plugs for the PreSales Collective along the way. Thank you very much. But obviously, it's a great chance for people to meet different hiring managers, meet different people in those roles. So if you are looking to make that shift from a different career into pre-sales, please come out, get active in the PSC. People are always happy to have conversations. And Jag, to your point, it's not about, hey, I'm trying to get a job at your company. It's, hey, I'm looking at this role. Can we talk about it? So thank you very much for that. And Kevin, so from the leader side, you know, what's something that you think all the leaders out there should know about hiring and recruiting non-traditional talent?
I think you have to really be you know, acutely aware of the fundamentals, right? The skills and competencies. And I think you need to know that cold, and you need to be able to get a good feel of whether those people have the, you know, the particular skills and competencies that you identify are going to be valuable. And you have to be able to get that out of individuals who maybe have not been through this. You know, if you've done this many times, you know how to answer the questions, but you're talking to people who just learned about this role, or maybe don't know about this role. And so you have to be able to, you know, find opportunities in, you know, their life, their side hustles, school projects. You know, can they find some compelling narrative about where they went and learned something quickly, you know, or where they overcame, you know, challenging circumstances, and can they tie that back? And, you know, you need to be able to do that with basically anybody, because we've opened this up to very broad range. And so just know what you're looking for. And if you're not sure, ask the people at PreSales Collective, ask your peers, and, you know, start to work on it. And it'll evolve and iterate. But I feel very comfortable in what I know what the fundamentals are and what questions ask. And if I see those answers, I feel there. But it took me a while to get to that point. So it takes work too.
Fantastic. No, thank you both very much for all of that conversation. So at this point, we have some time for Q&A out there in the audience. If you want to come off mute, pull yourself on camera, feel free to ask a question directly to either of our guests today.
I'd love to get your take on what's gone into, once you go past the hiring, the development program, you know, for anybody in a position like that. And also secondly, do you have the non-traditional hires in the same profiles as traditional hires, or is there a path to get them to that, or a specific team that you introduce them into the organization?
So was that first question directed towards me and the second question towards Kevin?
Either of you.
Got you. So was your first question, how do you sort of onboard and prepare yourself, and what are some of the roadblocks towards that?
Well, onboard and then ongoing development. Is that the same across the entire SE team, or a different path for non-traditional hires?
Okay, gotcha. It'd be a cool social experiment to ask people that don't know me to see if I now 2 years later, if they can figure out that I came from a non-traditional background, if I still have remnants of my past in my solution engineering today. I would say that definitely had to beef up on technical Salesforce knowledge. I had taken a course in data science and analytics before joining Salesforce. But I think the largest thing I had to learn was to not be a lone wolf. Like Kevin mentioned, I was an entrepreneur and I was used to doing everything myself. Working in an organization was honestly the biggest task for me. So my first piece of feedback I got from Kevin was do less. What he meant by that was like use the team around you. And the second most challenging thing was working with sales personalities, right? There's definitely an element there, and that was the larger goal there. And then the technical stuff, I mean, as you get more at bats, you'll learn. But I think DJs and musicians are always super curious that they go out of their way to learn about this stuff, regardless if it's a part of an onboarding plan or not.
Okay.
I'll defer to Kevin for that second question, though.
So in terms of the onboarding, I definitely recognize that we might have to deviate and adjust from our standard. And it was actually our leadership in my first leadership kickoff way back in February 2020, pre-pandemic. We were all in person, and they were talking about a few profiles of solution engineers that were brought in that had very different experience. But most of the time, they're actually like customers. And anyway, that really inspired me. And what they talked about was, what's the material impact if it takes maybe 2-3 months longer, or if we have to do it differently to the business, but compared to the overall huge win and the overall success that we could get from that hire. And so I knew that it might take a little bit longer. I knew that we might have to iterate along the way, and we did. We made some slight adjustments, and I learned a lot from this too, right? And so the idea is that as long as we're open to be learning and we're communicating with the person ramping, let's make a go at this. But certainly, I don't know if there's a one size fits all. I think you have to tailor fit it. I think you have to be able to be a little bit fluid on this and set those expectations, because getting customer facing is extremely challenging. It is hard, and I can't underestimate that. You know what I mean?
Yep, got it. That's insightful perspective. Thank you.
Jag,
other questions out there?
Jag, do you talk about your non-traditional background when you introduce yourself to customers? And do you find that actually helps you connect with customers?
Oh, yes, Thomas. Let me give you a little story. I bombed a 30K deal in my first 2 months selling at Salesforce. There was a piano in my background, and this customer asked me to play it before running the demo. I don't shy away from it, but I also have I'm pretty ADD, Tom. So I have I have interest in air traffic control and aviation and a bunch of other things. So I'll find some nuggets to relate with them. Sports is definitely not one of them, but I don't shy away from the fact that I come from a non-traditional background. I'll talk about it. And we have some customers that are, in the music tech industry that I can lend a helping hand in,
Very cool. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I was going to say thanks. The chat here is incredible, by the way. A lot of engagement there. So not as many questions, but tons of engagement in the chat. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, so first of all, thank you, Kevin and Jag, for joining today and sharing all of your insights. Thank you, everyone that joined as an attendee. Kevin made the point, like the chat has been great conversation. Please continue that. Come out to our Slack. We have questions. We have people that you can always chat with there. PreSalesCollective.com. You can see the sign up there. Also want to do a little bit of plugs for our upcoming event. So first of all, if you haven't heard, we kicked off our back to school tour with the PSC this fall. We're hosting a variety of local events, as you can see there, in person, getting to meet people face to face. We also have several of our engagement pieces. So for leaders, we have Leader Elevate to help acclimate you up from, I'm a first-time leader, I'm not sure what to do. We have great training and connections for that. We always, of course, have foundations for people that are newer to the pre-sales role. And of course, we have 2 large conferences happening in the fall, Leadership Next, for those that are in an individual contributor role now and aspiring to move into management, and Executive Summit for those that are already people managers. So be sure to check out all those links. You can find all of our upcoming events at the URL you see listed there. The QR code works as well. And our next webinar that's happening, Tactics to Ace Your Next Demo. So this is going to be a bit of sharing from experience and conversations with varieties of people that have been doing demos. So our panel is going to share tips and tactics on how to improve your demo game. It's something that all of us have to do, all of us can learn from. If you think you're already an expert at giving demos, there's probably still more you can learn. But also consider joining if you would like to share some of your experiences and in the chat, just like what you're seeing today. And then the final thing I want to promote is our next Pre-Sales Leadership Collective roundtable that's coming up on October 13th. Aditya is going to present on leading pre-sales in this changing buyers environment that we are all experiencing today. Do want to point out, this one is private for our Leadership Collective members. If you'd like to join and find out more information, be sure to go out to presalescollective.com/leaders for all the information there. Finally, a giant thank you to everyone for joining today, everyone who's a member of the Pre-Sales Collective. Love having you, love seeing all of this engagement and helping other people come into the greatest role that not that many people know of. So please check us out at presalescollective.com. Join the Slack community, join our collective so that you can see all of the events that are happening. Finally, I'll just say again, thank you, Kevin and Jag, for joining. Jag, especially as you're out at Dreamforce. Appreciate you making the extra time. So thank you both for being here, presenting on a very important topic, and helping hopefully a lot of other people learn how to join pre-sales as a non-traditional candidate, or if you're a hiring manager, picking up some tips on not ignoring this diverse workforce that's out there. So thank you both.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.